Hi, everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. This time, we're going to be talking about industrial policy. It's definitely been making a comeback lately.
Yeah, for sure. It's like all over the news these days.
Well, and we've got a really interesting article to dig into today by Diane Coyle.
Oh yeah, saw that.
She's a sharp economist. Her piece is called "Successful Industrial Policy Requires Industry Experts." It was just published in Project Syndicate. I think you'll find it pretty thought-provoking, so let's just jump right in.
Okay, sounds good.
So one of the things that really stood out to me was that even the IMF, not exactly known for being super interventionist,
Yeah, right.
they've kind of gotten on board with the whole industrial policy thing. It's kind of wild, right?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, for years they were all about free markets, and now
Hmm.
they're like, hey, maybe governments have a role to play after all.
Like a pretty big shift.
Yeah, big shift. But like, think about what's been happening in the world. We had the pandemic, which totally messed up global supply chains,
Hmm.
and then the war in Ukraine, which showed just how vulnerable we are when it comes to energy and food. And then, of course, you've got all these new technologies like AI and clean energy that are totally transforming industries.
It's like a whole new world out there.
Yeah. And governments are starting to realize they need to be more proactive, you know? Like they can't just sit back and let the market sort everything out.
It's like a perfect storm of things pushing industrial policy back to the forefront. But haven't we been down this road before? I mean, what about back in the 70s when governments tried to pick winners and it didn't really work out so well?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Like back then, governments often ended up supporting industries that weren't competitive.
Yeah.
Or backing technologies that were already outdated. It's like, you remember the Concorde
In vaguely.
supersonic travel for the super rich, but it was a total commercial flop. And Coyle's article is basically saying, hey, we need to learn from those mistakes.
Okay, so how do we avoid making the same mistakes this time around? I mean, it's easy to say, don't pick winners, but how do you actually do that in practice?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Because there's always going to be pressure to support certain industries.
Oh, absolutely. And Coyle points out that one of the biggest risks is the influence of, like, big corporations. She says politicians, especially those without, direct business experience, they could be easily swayed by lobbyists. Like, they get kind of, what's the word?
Dazzled.
Dazzled, yeah,
Huh.
by these CEOs with their fancy promises and their massive bank accounts. It's especially tricky in a world with, huge tech fortunes and these complex innovations like AI. It's understandable, right?
Mm.
But it can lead to policies that just help a select few at the expense of everyone else.
Yeah, it's like when you go to a car dealership, and that salesperson is laying on the charm, talking about all the amazing features. You might end up buying a car you can't even afford or you don't even really need.
Exactly. And when it comes to industrial policy, the stakes are way higher.
Oh, way higher.
We're talking about decisions that affect entire industries,
Yeah.
millions of jobs, and the overall health of the economy. So how do we make sure those decisions are based on what's truly best for the country, not just what benefits, like one particular company or CEO?
That's more than $1 million question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
That's the $1 billion question. Wait, didn't Coyle have some ideas about how to actually make this work?
She did, yeah. And this is where her central argument comes in. Coyle believes that the key is having people within government agencies who have, really deep industry expertise.
So we need people who know what they're doing, who understand all those little details, and who can't be easily swayed by fancy presentations or lobbying efforts.
Exactly. And that kind of expertise has been declining, since the 80s,
Yeah.
when the focus shifted away from industrial policy and more towards just letting the market do its thing.
Okay, so she's basically saying we need to bring back that expertise. But is that even realistic in today's world? Everything is changing so fast.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge challenge. The world is moving at an insane pace. But Coyle argues it's more important now than ever to have that kind of deep expertise.
Hmm.
How else are we going to navigate all this, the new technologies, global competition, and trying to achieve sustainable growth?
It sounds like we're talking about a pretty fundamental shift in how we think about the role of government.
Yeah, it really is. And it's a delicate balance, right? We need to support important industries, but without crushing competition.
And be proactive, but not too bureaucratic or too heavy-handed.
Exactly. And most importantly, we need to make sure that industrial policy is actually based on a real understanding of how these industries work, not just driven by politics or corporate lobbying.
It makes a lot of sense. It's not just about throwing money at a problem. It's about having the right people in place, people with the right knowledge to actually make good decisions. Wow, this is complex,
Oh, it's definitely complex.
but also really fascinating.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, it is fascinating. Like, we're really talking about potentially, like, rebuilding a whole system here, not just, like, adding a few new jobs in the government. It's about building like, a culture of industry knowledge.
Mm.
Like, if you think back to when the U.S. was, like, leading the space race,
Oh, yeah.
they had all these incredible scientists and engineers at NASA.
That's such a good comparison. I mean, it really is a similar kind of ambition, but for the economy as a whole. So how do we even begin to do that? Like, how do you cultivate that kind of expertise?
And is the big question. And Coyle doesn't really, you know, she doesn't have all the answers, but she does have some interesting ideas. Like, for example, she suggests embedding experts within government agencies,
Okay.
like maybe through exchange programs where officials could actually go and spend time working in specific industries.
Interesting.
Or even like having industry professionals come in and, share their expertise with the government, kind of like a reverse exchange program.
I love that idea. So it's like instead of this kind of like back and forth, between government and industry, where each side is kind of suspicious of the other,
Totally.
it's more about creating a real partnership.
Exactly.
So both sides can bring their strengths to the table.
Yeah.
The government can provide the framework, the resources, and the vision. And then industry can bring the practical know-how and the insights into what's really happening on the ground.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all about building those connections.
Coyle also talks about this idea of like a Goldilocks balance. Like,
Yeah.
we need to support strategically important industries, but without stifling competition. How do we do that? How do we make sure the government doesn't become too heavy-handed?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think transparency and accountability are really important here.
Okay.
Like, you need to have clear guidelines for how decisions are made, and you need to make sure those guidelines are actually followed.
Yeah, we need good oversight.
Exactly. And then independent evaluations to actually see if the policies are working, if they're having the desired effect.
But even with all that, it still feels like there's like a lot of gray area. I mean, how do we even decide which industries should get that support? Like, is it just about economic potential, or are there other factors? Like, what about national security
Yeah.
or the environment or social impact?
Those are all really important considerations. It can't just be about dollars and cents. We need to think about the bigger picture. What kind of society are we trying to build? Like supporting clean energy, for example, that could have both economic and environmental benefits. So it's about trying to align industrial policy with these broader societal goals.
Okay, so we're using industrial policy as a tool to shape the future we want, investing in industries that create good jobs, that are innovative, that contribute to like a more sustainable economy. But how does this all connect back to like the average person? How does this actually impact people's lives?
I think it's all about creating opportunities. Like, imagine a world where industrial policy is really successful. You could see more high-paying jobs, greater economic security for everyone, a higher standard of living. It's about addressing those big challenges like climate change and inequality. So yeah, if we get this right, it can have a huge impact on people's everyday lives.
I'm starting to really see that. It's not just some like theoretical idea. It's about using the power of government to make people's lives better, to
Right.
create a fairer, more prosperous society.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what makes it so.
It's amazing to think about just how deeply industrial policy can impact our lives. It's not just this thing that economists and policymakers argue about. It really can shape the whole fabric of our society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important for all of us to understand it, to be part of the conversation. Because it's not just about economic numbers.
Right.
It's about our values,
Yeah.
like what we prioritize as a society and the kind of future that we're trying to build.
And thinking back to Coyle's article, that point about expertise really stuck with me. It's clear that just having good intentions or catchy slogans isn't enough. We need people in government who actually get it, who understand how industries work,
Right.
who can see the long-term consequences of different policies, and who can handle all the complexities of the global market, and all the new technologies and everything.
Yeah, totally. It's like, imagine trying to perform surgery without a surgeon.
Oh, wow.
You might have the best intentions, but without the right knowledge and skills, you're probably going to do more harm than good.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. So, where do we go from here? Like, what are some things our listeners should, be thinking about as they go about their day?
Well, I think the first thing is, pay attention to the conversations that are happening around industrial policy, like who's talking about it, what are their goals, and think about the potential benefits and risks.
Be an informed citizen.
Yeah. Engage with the issues and hold our leaders accountable,
Yeah.
because industrial policy is way too important to just be left to like the economists and the politicians. It affects all of us, and we all have a stake in shaping its future.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. It's clear that industrial policy is complex and it's constantly evolving, but, it also has incredible potential for positive change.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a pleasure talking about this with you.
Likewise.
And to our listeners, I'd say this. The future of industrial policy isn't something that just happens to us. It's something that we can actually help create. So stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
I love that. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those tough questions.